All right, let's jump back in time. We're going to explore a civilization whose ideas on everything from politics to philosophy, art, and science became the actual bedrock of the world we live in today. This is the incredible story of ancient Greece.
So, here's the big question that drives this whole story. How on earth did a civilization scattered across all these rocky mountains and isolated islands manage to create a cultural explosion that's still making waves today? That's the puzzle we're here to figure out.
Okay, so first up, let's trace their journey. We're going to go from the world of myth all the way to the metropolis. From the very first palace builders to the rise of those iconic cities that would come to define everything we think of when we say ancient Greece.
The history of Greece is this huge, sweeping story of powers rising and falling. It all kicks off with these really early civilizations, like the Minoans and then the more warlike Mycenaeans. But after a mysterious period of collapse they call the Dark Age, something totally new emerges: the polis, the city-state. And believe me, that one innovation set the stage for everything that followed, especially Greece's famous classical period and the Hellenistic Age, when its culture literally changed the world.
Okay, so this idea of the polis, it is absolutely central to understanding Greek life. You have to picture the geography. All those mountains and the sea, they didn't create one big unified country. Nope. They created hundreds of fiercely independent little communities, tucked away in isolated valleys and on islands. So each polis was basically its own tiny nation. And you really couldn't find two better examples of how different these city-states could be than the big rivals, Athens and Sparta. On one hand, you've got Athens, a bustling center for trade, art, and philosophy. It's where democracy was born, where citizens had a real say. And then you have Sparta, which was, well, the complete opposite. A closed-off, military-first society where your entire life was dedicated to being the perfect soldier. Everything, and I mean everything, was about discipline and being ready for war.
Now let's zoom in on this one. Relatively short but absolutely brilliant period in the 5th century BC. This is when one city, Athens, just exploded with a level of culture and innovation that would change the world forever.
So what sparked this golden age? It really boils down to a single year, 479 BC. This is the moment the Greeks, against all odds, finally defeated the massive invading Persian Empire. That victory wasn't just about freedom. It unleashed this incredible wave of confidence, wealth, and pure ambition, especially in Athens.
And this quote from the great Athenian leader Pericles, it just perfectly sums up the spirit of the time. The idea that power should rest with the people was revolutionary. Now, was their democracy perfect? Of course not. It excluded women, slaves, and foreigners. But the principle itself, wow. That was a radical shift from the kings and emperors ruling everywhere else.
And this democratic spirit, it fueled an absolute explosion of culture. Think about it. The freedom to get up and debate in public wasn't just for politics. It led to philosophers like Socrates and Plato asking questions about, well, everything. It gave birth to public theater, where the whole society could look at itself in the mirror through these powerful tragedies and comedies. And it inspired these breathtaking public works of art, like the Parthenon, a symbol of the city's power and its ideal.
But here's the thing. You can't understand the Golden Age without understanding the conflicts that created it. All that peace and prosperity was built on a foundation of war. And in the end, war is exactly what would bring it all crashing down.
The Persian Wars were the ultimate underdog story. You have this collection of tiny, squabbling city-states facing the biggest empire on Earth. And what do? The unthinkable. They team up. These legendary moments, like the heroic stand at Thermopylae, they forged a powerful, shared Greek identity for the very first time.
But, and this is the great tragedy of the Greek story, that unity, it just couldn't last. As soon as the common enemy was gone, those old rivalries came roaring back. And the two main victors, Athens and Sparta, started looking at each other not as allies, but as rivals for control of the Greek world. It was a collision course.
And that collision was the Peloponnesian War. It was basically a Greek world war, pitting two massive alliances against each other. On one side you had the Delian League, a naval empire led by democratic Athens. On the other, the Peloponnesian League, a coalition of land-based powers led by the oligarchic Sparta. The war dragged on for almost 30 years, and by the end, it had left the entire Greek world exhausted, broke, and incredibly vulnerable.
And all that infighting? It created a power vacuum. A perfect opportunity for a new, unstoppable force that was watching from the north. A force led by one of the most famous and formidable figures in all of history.
Alexander of Macedon. This guy was not your average king. From his father, Philip II, he inherited this professional, state-of-the-art army that had already conquered the weakened Greek states. But here's the kicker. Alexander had been personally tutored by the philosopher Aristotle, so he had this unique combination of raw military genius and a deep intellectual appreciation for Greek culture. He had the brawn and the brains. So with Greece secured, Alexander just unleashed. In a little more than a decade, he led his army on one of the most astonishing campaigns in history. He didn't just fight the Persian Empire, he shattered it. He marched into Egypt, where he was crowned pharaoh, and founded the great city of Alexandria. And he just kept pushing east, marching his men all the way to the edge of the known world in India, creating one of the largest empires ever seen.
But here's the craziest part. Alexander dies suddenly, at just 32. And you think, well, that's the end of the story. But no. In fact, his greatest conquest was just getting started. And it wasn't a military one.
See, Alexander's physical empire crumbled pretty fast after he died. But his cultural empire, that was built to last. We call this new era the Hellenistic period. As Greek soldiers and settlers spread out across this massive territory he'd conquered, their language, their art, their ideas, they all started to mix and blend with local traditions. It created this vibrant, new hybrid culture that stretched all the way from Egypt to Asia. And the legacy of that Hellenistic world, and really of ancient Greece as a whole, is just immense. Their philosophical methods, using logic and reason, they laid the groundwork for all of Western thought. Political ideas like democracy and citizenship are things we're still debating and building on. Pioneers like Archimedes and Euclid made these giant leaps in science and math, and their standards for art, for architecture, for drama, they still inspire us. Which leaves us with one final big thought. Their empires are long gone, their temples are beautiful ruins, and pretty much no one worships Zeus or Athena anymore. So why does this ancient world still feel so present? I think it's because the Greeks weren't just conquerors or builders. They were thinkers. They asked the really big questions. How should we live? How should we govern ourselves? How can we understand the universe? And those are the exact same questions we're all still asking today.